script for live captions. And we encourage you to keep your cameras on and ask questions in the chat box during the webinar, but there will be a Q&A section after Anna's presentation. So I'm really happy to introduce our final speaker, Anna Lynn, who is a mental health promotion coordinator at the Minnesota Department of Health. She is mainly focused on advancing a public health approach to mental well-being and resilience in Minnesota, particularly through policy and community engagement. Anna was a member of the first cohort of 25 ACE community resilience coaches, ACEs in adverse childhood experiences, and is committed to supporting community and system responses to trauma. She has a background in mental health, policy, community organizing, and data analysis. Well, and so warm welcome to Anna.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. We'll jump right in. I hope that we have content that everyone is interested in, and I'm really happy to be here to talk about a public health approach to mental health. We're going to share kind of an overview of what that means, what mental health promotion means, and what it could look like in your community. I'm happy to answer any questions throughout the presentation, even before the Q&A, but so just interrupt me, Shelley, if there's a critical question in the chat that I miss. Before we jump in, I am going to just wanting to set the stage and make sure, ground us in what we're talking about. I'm sure most of you probably know what we're talking about, but when we talk about mental health and public health, typically we're talking about a broader approach to mental health, a broader understanding. So we're talking about this, we usually use this World Health Organization definition to ground us in what it means to be mentally healthy. You know, generally it means we're generally well when we know what we're good at, when we use our skills and our strengths, when we can manage our daily stress, we can work, contribute to our world, and you know, this is really a whole person perspective, one that we can all, I hope, see ourselves in. Put another way, if people like an operational definition, sometimes people use the word flourishing to capture what mental well-being means. And the operational definition of flourishing is very similar. It means that generally, you know, you're feeling pretty good. You're generally happy and interested in life, and you're functioning well. You have, you know, positive relationships, a sense of identity, purpose in life, and socially connected. You're functioning in society, or society is working well for you. And you have that sense of contribution and acceptance. So that's an operational definition of flourishing, and that's what we're talking about today. Sometimes people confuse mental well-being with mental illness. That's often kind of the dominant narrative when we talk about mental health. And really, just like to reiterate that mental health is much more than the absence of mental illness. So mental health is something that all of us aspire to, or should aspire to. Certainly there's a relationship between the two, but there's good evidence that these are distinct things. So you see here this, what's called the dual continuum, and it shows the relationship between mental illness and mental wellness. And we know that there are distinct patterns of disease and other experiences in each of these different quadrants. So those who are languishing in this bottom quadrant, or the bottom half of this slide here, whether with no mental illness or mental illness, are those who aren't experiencing the well-being characteristics that I described earlier. And we know those who are languishing with no mental illness in this bottom white quadrant actually do worse than those in the top left quadrant, or people who have a mental illness and who are flourishing. We certainly probably know many people who are maybe have a mental illness throughout their lives, but who are doing well. They're flourishing. They have the relationships that they need and want. They have a purpose in life. They have all that they need to flourish throughout their life. So this relationship, and a way of describing the relationship between mental illness and well-being, we have experiences that we can relate to that help to kind of describe that. And public health's primary objective, of course, is to move everyone up to the top half of the quadrant. And this is really important because we know from data collection at the national level that the majority of the population has moderate or is languishing, moderate mental health or is languishing. So there's really a lot of work to do. And this has a lot of implications. It really matters. It's not just about making people happy, although that is valuable in and of itself, but there's real implications when people are not flourishing. There's a greater risk for all of these conditions or experiences that you see on the slide here. So you can see that a lack of well-being is really a significant problem. And we also know, given our frame here of suicide prevention, that lack of flourishing impacts suicide ideation. This slide compares those who have a clinical diagnosis of mental illness and those who did not meet a criteria for a diagnosis. And we see that there's a pattern of a risk of suicide ideation among both groups when they have poor mental health. It's a little, different for the groups, but there's still the trend and the pattern. So I thought, and I'm happy to answer any questions if they come up. So what helps us to promote well-being and help everyone to flourish? There is a lot that we know about what contributes to our well-being. There are a range of strategies that we can use to improve our relationships and at the community level, like programming, like to help individuals, families, and improve equity. I'm gonna kind of briefly walk through each of these and share some examples. So the first and foremost thing that we know is critical for our well-being is to have supportive relationships. Relationships are really at the heart of our mental health. We probably all know that, either intellectually or just, we just all know that, I think, in our life. We know that those are the most important things in our lives. And there are really a range of strategies to help improve the relationships, from things like parenting classes to support groups, to even policy and practices like creating community spaces where people can connect and build healthier relationships. Before the pandemic, COVID certainly has exacerbated our isolation, but we had a social connectedness sort of crisis even before the pandemic. This is Dr. Vivek Murthy, who is our current Surgeon General, and he was raising this alarm for the last, 5 or 6 years, really, maybe longer, talking about the problems that the population is experiencing with social isolation. Social isolation is really about relationships, but it's also about the opportunity to contribute, to our communities and have that sense of purpose and belonging, which is so critical to our well-being. this is why it can be really challenging, for example, for some folks who after retirement, you know, they may not have all the same access to those relationships and access to a way to contribute. So social isolation is really more profound and common among groups who have been historically excluded from opportunity. So with COVID, social connectedness is even more central to this topic of mental health promotion. And if you haven't already heard, social isolation is the new smoking. So we know a lot more, more and more research is coming out about the health implications of social isolation. So this is really a critical need for our communities. And of course, related to that, we know we need to help communities and individuals and families build our social skills. Typically, when we talk about skills, we talk about social and emotional skills, but I think life skills are also critical. And there are lots of things that communities can do to support our social skills. There's things like social emotional learning curriculum in schools that are in a key strategy, but there are other skills that we can promote as well, such as gratitude. Let me share some information about that. A lot of communities and organizations are trying to promote opportunities and reminders for people to practice gratitude. It can be a really valuable skill and resource. Sometimes people think it's really fluffy, but there's good evidence that gratitude is a muscle, and even a short-term gratitude journal can reduce symptoms of depression for up to 6 months. So there's also evidence that practicing gratitude is linked to reductions in blood pressure, increases in school performance, improved relationships, and more. One organization called the Bounce Back Project that Alina Health implemented promoted the 3 good things, which is writing down 3 good things every day. And they promoted that through schools and in businesses, and they have resources that you could use in your community organization to help do that as well. Another key domain or lever that we could use to promote well-being is creating community. We know that connections to community are really critical for well-being. So you probably see the thread, the connection between all of these things so far. Again, it's relationships. But community really contributes to our identity, and it can help us have a sense of belonging and, again, purpose. It creates access to resources and to opportunities for development. We know things like involvement in faith communities is linked to reduction in stress, anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and suicide. As well, community also creates an opportunity to practice our cultural traditions, which are really critical. Creating community it's about belonging and social connection. And again, but it's also about creating access to, or having access to like self-determination. You know, if you think about places where you really feel like you belong, usually those are the spaces where you have there's shared power, right? And there's an opportunity to create and solve the problems or whatever issues that are occurring in that community. It creates space for us to have self-determination. So anything that we can do in our communities to create shared power is really valuable. Healthy lifestyle, I feel like, is obvious. This is something that we talk about a lot, and it's certainly an important public health strategy at large, right? But we know that our heads are connected to our bodies. So certainly supporting a healthy lifestyle is really critical for our mental health and well-being. And we can create access to, exercise opportunities, promoting healthy sleep habits are really critical, healthy foods. A number of communities have really been intentional about creating and supporting healthy sleep, sharing information and resources. There's colleges have implemented sleep coaches, but then businesses and schools can also impact this by creating policies and practices that promote healthy sleep, just as an example. So like regular schedules and avoiding sending messages or emails late at night, or at least uh, avoiding the expectation that people have to respond, so that we can have some better routines. Kelly, we were just talking about having routines in our life. So those are things that can help us support our well-being. Certainly, there's lots of information and resources and work happening around healing from trauma. I'm sure many of you have been involved in that work, and it's a critical domain for supporting well-being. We know over half of our population has had a adverse childhood experience, and that doesn't even include all of the other traumas that could be considered. And really, just for grounding, trauma is anything that overwhelms our system's ability, our body, our mental health, our ability to cope. So training and implementing trauma-informed community resources is an important strategy. This is probably one of my favorite domains, if you will, and that is a healthy environment, because I think it's such an ideal public health kind of strategy. And this, when we talk about healthy environment, we're talking about both the built environment and the natural environment, so nature. And nature is a huge resource, especially here in Minnesota. So I'm going to talk a lot about that. We know, I really can't say enough about nature. We know that it's a natural stress buffer that can really impact our rates of depression and anxiety and our overall well-being. It can increase creativity, attention, cognition for children and adults. The old-fashioned idea that children get distracted if they have windows. I don't know if anyone's heard that, but that was like a thing for a while. That's far from the truth. We know that having in communities with more green space within a kilometer compared to homes that had less than 10% or more, let me reverse that. Homes that had less than 10% of this space that was green space within a kilometer of their homes had a greater risk of depression and anxiety compared to homes and families who had more than 10% green space within that kilometer of, if that makes sense, of from their home. So pretty profound, I think, opportunities, especially in Minnesota. We have so much opportunity to support access to nature. The Children in Nature Network is an organization that supports access to nature for children in particular, and they have a library of resources that demonstrates that kids are healthier, happier, smarter, and good stewards of their environment when they have access to nature. And then the last thing I'll say about nature is that it can facilitate, even proximity to nature in housing developments or in our communities can really lower rates of violence and increase social connectedness. And that's because there's examples that I'll share later that we can use in our communities to just create spaces for people to gather, to, having benches where people can enjoy nature or connect with other people is really valuable. And then building those, like how we design our communities, how we design our housing facilities can really impact our well-being. So I mentioned that when we talk about healthy environment, it's not just nature, but it's also the built environment. And we know that noise, you see these two different examples here. And when there's investment in communities, and it provides, a sense of hope and investment in ourselves. When there's disinvestment in communities, like what you see on the right hand, it can increase our anxiety, our stress, our hopelessness, and support poor self-esteem, and just this sense of danger and unsafety. And there's physiological impacts from that environment and experiencing that environment. So all of the ways that, and all of the things that are part of the design of our communities is really important for our well-being. I can pause for questions if people have them. Any questions so far? Or thoughts people want to share? I'm just giving a quick overview, and then I'll go a little deeper into some examples. So another domain or things that can really influence our well-being is economic opportunity. This is really kind of the social determinants of health that we think about. Many of us are familiar with that term and that concept. It certainly applies to our mental well-being. Food insecurity, housing quality, unemployment, poverty. These are all things that impact our mental well-being. So just a real quick example. These are research studies that demonstrate that connection between economic opportunity and our mental well-being. I think the one that speaks to me the most, that seems most profound, is the housing. When children who move more than 8 times have 2.5 times increased risk of suicide in adulthood. So certainly, it can have a huge impact. But, when you think about, it's not just the material lack that, that directly translates to poor mental health or well-being. I think of poverty as social exclusion. This is, I thought, a really valuable way of thinking about poverty, because it's really about the impact it has on our relationships. So, housing and even access to food and all of those things, when we're excluded from society in those ways, we experience that disrupted relationship, and it impacts our sense of self-worth and purpose. Was there a question or comment? No? Okay. So I thought that's just a helpful way of thinking about the social determinants. And the last real domain that we often talk about is equity and policy. It's last but not least, of course. We know chronic stress from racism or all of the isms, other sources of inequities impact our health and our relationships and our ability to thrive. My favorite example of a policy that has demonstrated impact on our mental health at the population level is the marriage amendment. So there was research that looked at states that had passed the marriage amendment. This was before the Supreme Court ruling, compared to states that hadn't yet passed a marriage amendment. And there was a significant reduction in suicide attempts by LGBT students, and a 7% overall decrease, and a significant reduction in suicide attempts across the whole population. So that is, to me, is what is most profound about that study, is because when we improve equity, we improve the well-being of the whole population, not just those who are directly impacted. So I thought, because we are, giving voice to the value of everyone around us. At least that's how I think about it. So there are a lot of examples and social policies that are could directly impact our well-being like this. Well, this is a lot, I know. And I know that's often the challenge is where do we go? What do we do? This is too much. It's like the social determinants of health. And so there's certainly no one size fits all strategy or plan for every community. But each community really has to identify what works for them among the menu of strategies that they could consider. That we could look at what are the really big themes of the moment and how could we kind of scope this a little bit more? How could we focus on what are the most critical things right now? So the themes of the moment that I think are most clear are, of course, isolation and social disconnection. COVID really has exacerbated our isolation, but there are also other factors that are contributing to that. There's strong political divides in our families and communities. There are changes in demographics that are impacting many communities, trying to recalibrate how they build those connections and relationships across populations that, don't share the same cultural background or history. And then in some cases, social media contributes to that social isolation, ironically. The second real theme is there's just, again, a pileup of toxic stress from COVID and, all of the losses that people have experienced throughout this pandemic, ongoing uncertainty that we're all continuing to experience, economic uncertainty, work, school, and then there are just a lot of stress from different communities that are experiencing because of the inequities that continue to be pervasive and really evident by things like COVID and the differential impacts it's having on communities. Excuse me. And then the final theme really, I thought, is related, but the inequity that we continue to see in the civil unrest. So through things like that we see in COVID, the George Floyd murder, the community divides, and the current and historical trauma. So those seem to me to be like the most salient things in the moment. So I'm curious, if you have other thoughts or if this resonates with you, I'm curious if you could share thoughts in the chat. That would be really, I think, helpful and valuable to have some discussion around that, or at least share some thinking about these themes. So I thought we could talk a little bit about, well, if these are the current pressing issues, how can we address them? So I would offer that there are maybe 3 main types of actions that we can take in our communities to address each of them. Social connection and belonging. We can do a couple of things. We can do lots of things, but I'm suggesting that we can implement programs and models as one body of work to address social connection and belonging. There are lots of examples of models out there that are being implemented, and these are just a few examples. I wanted to share, I'll share a little bit more about a couple of these. So compassionate communities is a great example of a work that's happening in Mankato. And I know other communities are starting to consider becoming a compassionate community. This is a community-wide effort to create social norms and pathways for compassion. And they have some concrete ways that they're doing that. And some that are just evolving because of the community engagement that's happening as they declare themselves a compassionate community. So that's a really interesting resource and strategy. Men's Sheds is a very concrete example. That is a club for older men, as the chair of the Men's Sheds US Association would say. It's made up of mostly retired people, and it provides them an outlet for social connection and shared activity. It's been implemented widely in Australia, Wales, and Ireland. There are currently 5, maybe more now in Minnesota, men's sheds, and other communities. We've been working with Wasika to help work on implementing and developing a men's sheds program. And then the last one that I wanted to share listed here is giving chorus voice. It's a specific example, but it is a choir, or there are many choirs for people with Alzheimer's and those who support them. It is an amazing group that has had amazing results, and they would love to create a choir or chorus in every community in the state. It's a powerful strategy for a very specific population, but it's just a beautiful organization. So the next thing that I think communities and organizations can really do to support social connection is we can communicate and build partnerships around this idea. MDH created a toolkit early on, or last year, called Stay Connected Minnesota during COVID, and we actually have been revising that. Tanya and Chris Haugen and others have been leading that charge to revise it and add to it. So that's a tool that you could use. It's a plug and play resource. The Center for Community Health is an organization in the Twin Cities they're looking to engage communities around social connection. And they're talking about programs or practices like social prescribing and how they can get their clinics and organizations to do that. Where healthcare providers, they talk with patients about, what are your connections and how are you building on those and supporting those. And then we can create resources or spaces rather, where people in our communities or organizations can come to listen to each other and share their stories. Creating opportunities like that can be through art or culture or intentional storytelling about a shared challenge. Can be really powerful tool for helping to support belonging. And then the last really section for this topic is policy change. This is really where we want, I think, to be moving for public health approach, is how can we shift policies and practices that support our well-being. And some examples for social connection might include ensuring access to green space in schoolyards, housing and city planning. I mentioned that before, but and I mentioned the Children in Nature Network. They're working with the Trust for Public Land to help pilot green schoolyards in Minnesota. And so they would be a great partner if that's something that your organization or community is interested in. The DNR also has a grant opportunity that supports small grants for communities to create opportunities and resources to help kids get access to nature. Workplace policies that would create that connectedness would be things like paid leave and family support, and floating holidays is a great example that can ensure everyone from every culture feels valued and seen. I know a number of organizations like the Bush Foundation is moving to that. We can also include opportunities for volunteering. Volunteering is a really great strategy to support, help promote that connectedness to our community, help promote that sense of contribution. There are programs like service learning requirements or other opportunities that many businesses have offered to their employees to allow them time to volunteer. And then, of course, we can design inclusive spaces, which I mentioned earlier. And this is a great list of resources for inclusive spaces. This is a list that comes from Healthy by Design. It's a phenomenal resource that includes dozens of examples of ways to create healthy, inclusive public spaces. I'll let you read through those. But I thought I would just share a couple of examples that I've seen communities do use this and the impact it's had. So one of the examples they list here is reviewing permit policies regarding group size to support large culture gatherings. I know Bloomington has dealt with this, but in the past, I worked in Frogtown, St. Paul, and there were really serious challenges around a Hmong funeral home that often gathered lots of people during the funerals, and it created lots of tension in the communities because of parking and parking permit rules. And so resolving that was really critical to having the Hmong families and the Hmong funeral home really experience that sense of belonging in the community, because it was such a critical practice for the families in the community to have available. So that was a critical thing to resolve that supported their mental well-being. Another example, I supported a group that traveled to Washington State to learn about their community strategies. And Walla Walla, Washington, when they started working on resilience, they asked their community what they wanted and what was important. And one of the first things they did was to redesign and build a mural in an overpass. So they wanted access to the park but it wasn't safe or inviting for kids or families to walk through this overpass because it was so dilapidated, and some people were gathering there that maybe shouldn't be gathering, and they figured out a way to resolve that issue, and they developed a community mural which created just it touched on multiple things that we've already talked about. So resolving issues like this in communities can really have profound ripple effects on our mental health and well-being. So the second theme that we talked about was skills to manage, how do we support or address the buildup of toxic stress? So many people are doing this work of trying to share and build our skills to manage that stress is really critical. And there are a number of ways we can do that. Again, programs and models that are being implemented. These are some examples. I can tell you a little bit more about two of them. The Wellness Recovery Action Planning is an evidence-based strategy that provides support for identifying our stressors, our triggers, and each individual in this group creates a individual wellness plan. This is an evidence-based model that reduces depression, but it's valuable for everybody to build a wellness plan, and including for families to do this. It's really a beautiful model in its simplicity and its effective in its effectiveness. Excuse me. The other example that I wanted to share was living life to the full. This is also an evidence-based model that's been implemented broadly in Australia and Canada and Wales. You see the theme there. Those countries have a lot more investment in promotion and wellness because they've been talking about that for decades. And living life to the full is an evidence-based model that is really largely based on cognitive behavioral skills, but it's implemented by lay people in their communities. It's facilitated by a lay person, and anyone can participate. There's no requirement for admission, if you will, no diagnosis required. And there was a pilot program in the Somali community in Minneapolis. They had 100% retention in this group, which is really unheard of in most groups. So there's really, I think it's a very promising resource and strategy. And then again, we can communicate and share resources about how to support, how we can manage our stress. There are lots to choose from, especially right now. And there's probably loads more that you know about that I don't know about. A couple of examples here. Wellness Minnesota has tons of great videos and recordings and trainings that you could use or promote with your staff or your communities. The Bounce Back Project from Alina, which I mentioned earlier, they have a Train the Trainer program, and they have lots of well-designed resources and information that can be downloaded and shared. And then the Greater Good Science Center out of Berkeley, California is another really fantastic resource that has articles and resources and trainings, videos that you could use to communicate about how we can manage our stress. Those are just a few. There's so many others. And then policies to support stress management might include things like, again, access to nature. I know I sound like a broken record, but I really can't say enough about that. But also workplace policies. There are lots of workplace policies that we could implement, like having meeting-free hours or days. I know, again, Bush Foundation has implemented that strategy. Of course, things like space for childcare or for wellness practices, if people are in person, which some of us may never go back to that. A colleague, another workplace policy example, a colleague of mine was who's been looking at workplace strategies for stress management in retail, told me about a resource where staff can use an online tool to change their schedules, which is can be really challenging and stressful for people. But having the power to do it independently and really reduce the stress that both the staff and the management were experiencing, gives you that sense of control. And so that's another, I think, really interesting strategy and example. I know I'm not going into all the details. There are links here that if you want to look at, you can dive in more deeply. And we promoted many of these things at our learning community each month throughout the years. So we have other resources. Some of them are online, or you could reach out to me if you want more information. And then the last is really about steps to improve equity and address historical trauma. And oh, there we go. Sorry, I have my notes and I got confused here. And I think there are a little different examples here. The first strategy I would offer is the need to build shared leadership. I think this is kind of a critical key for addressing equity in community and organizations. There are some examples here listed, and there are others certainly, but the two that I wanted to highlight, one was Health Commons. That is a program that was actually implemented by Augsburg and I think Fairview Health. It was a drop-in health clinic, but they created a space for a women's circle, and that women's circle, they met and they identified challenges that they were experiencing in their community. And the community was very specific to this high rise. This was in the Somali community in Minneapolis. It was very specific to a residential building where people were living, and they, were able to collectively solve their problems, which is very powerful and very, critical to our well-being. The other example is Healthy Together Wilmer, which is actually a more recent example. Blue Cross Blue Shield implemented or partnered with the city of Wilmer for a period of 5 years to create more healthy communities. They were dealing with lots of different stressors and continue to deal with those. But one of the key components of that work was to create a space for people to come together to identify ideas and problems that they could solve together. So they created like the idea fund where they could a resource they could use, the community could use to address some of the needs that the community and the different communities were experiencing. So this is really a shared leadership strategy. It not only addresses the specific problems, but the act of building that shared leadership is critical. And that can happen in our organizations as well. So I think that's a really critical like nugget of truth that we need to implement broadly in order to address equity. The other strategy we can use is hosting and supporting community discussions about equity, community dialogue. There are a number of organizations that are trying to do this. One example is the Peace Building Institute, which has been hosting healing circles for many years. We just highlighted their work in the learning community. And so we have a webinar that if you want to learn more about what they're doing, they host circle dialogues about race and equity in communities and in organizations. So that could be a resource. I feel like we're running out of time, so I feel like I want to shift to questions.
Yeah. Everyone feel free to unmute yourselves and ask questions, or if you want, I can kind of moderate if you add into the chat.
Yeah, and my opening question would really just be, given some of these ideas that we've shared, how does this connect to your work? And what comes to mind given these examples? I see a hand. Somebody has a hand up.
Yeah, Catherine?
Hi. I'm actually in Florida, and here in Florida we have a state-wide peer warm line that we run, and so that's been something that's been very helpful during isolation and COVID and people not having as much access to community support. And then we're also developing peer networks across the state of Florida in each region so that individuals have people in their areas that they can connect with who also are in recovery.
That's a great example of building connections in unique ways. We have a virtual peer support network that's been hosting all kinds of activities online. So I think, yeah, that's a great example. Thanks for sharing that. Other thoughts or questions, or how does this connect to your work? Is this what you thought about when you think about mental health promotion, or does this seem like different from what you were expecting? Or
I really like that you included a lot of nature examples and just a lot of community spaces in there, just because community connectedness is connected to the built environment, and it's all in the social determinants of health realm. And we don't really think about that because public health is not as connected to the built environment and those initiatives, but we really are if we connect mental health and well-being into that. And Mindy Johnson has a comment. They say, I'm a behavioral interventionalist at a pre-K to 8 Montessori school in Southeast Minnesota. I appreciate the resources. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think, yeah, there are a lot of resources to get out, and um, COVID really has given us a number of lessons, right? I think nature is one of them. I think it really opened up people's eyes that that is such an important resource for our well-being. At least that's kind of what I've experienced. Yeah, and Anna Clow, you said nature is something that many cities lack and could do better with, but it is so impactful. Even in rural communities where you might expect there to be more access to nature, it can be challenging for different reasons because a lot of it isn't public. Rachel says that I think promoting mental well-being more in society will help ease the stigma of mental health in general. It saddens me that so many people stifle their feelings when they're struggling. Absolutely. Judy says, this is what I have thought about as well. Okay, great. So we're on the same page there. Many of the projects I'm working on incorporate community connectedness and culture. Awesome. We would love to hear more about that, Judy, because it's going to take lots of different strategies and ideas. So reach out to us.
Sure, yeah, I can just share a couple of things here real quick. Sorry, my background is probably a little noisy, so I was trying to just type instead. Some things that we've been working on. I'm a mental health crisis coordinator for White Earth Mental Health on the White Earth Reservation. And so we're working in more of a very large rural area that has very limited access to many of the resources that are in urban areas. So some things that we've been doing just kind of to foster that community connectedness. Every month we've been offering a cultural education course in each of the different communities on the reservation. And so we have somebody typically from that community who maybe specializes in a cultural craft or teaching or activity, and they instruct that class with those, attending. So that's been doing really well just to, bring that connection to the community, incorporating culture as well. And then we've been doing some additional activities where just, putting together a movie and having a movie broadcasted in maybe the school gymnasium for community members to come and attend. The other activities that we've done during the summertime, just trying to create community games and fun, doing kickball tournaments, softball tournaments, and beanbag tournaments for those to enter. So they've been really fun. It's brought people out to the community. Our program's been able to purchase some of the items, actually most of the items for these activities as well. So we've been pretty lucky to do that. And it's just really been great to bring people back out into the community again. And especially, summertime was much easier because we had the outdoors and ability to, kind of maintain those social distancing, but yet, be together as a community.
Great. I love that. That's beautiful, especially the cultural piece. Because, so many, especially, Native Americans, the culture has been, what's the word I'm looking for?
It's been missing.
I don't, yeah.
Back a better way to put it, it's been missing. And, there's
attacked too, right?
Yeah. There's a push to bring it back, and I'm grateful for that. We have really great leaders in White Earth right now that are very much pushing for that community connectedness and cultural piece, where there's opportunities to learn the Ojibwe language, and the college has been doing virtual Ojibwe language classes, which has been great. Virtual talking circles, which can be tricky, but we've done it. But also bringing those back to the community as well. Ceremonies, depending on what they are, bringing those back. But with COVID, we've had our ups and downs with being able to actually conduct some of the ceremonies. But it's good stuff.
That's beautiful. Is anyone doing other things like that, or? What about these themes? Did those themes sort of resonate with y'all? Do these feel like a way to think about how to focus on, the breadth of what we could be doing. It's still a lot, probably, but because these are big topics, right? Rachel says yes, for sure. Okay, great. And they're all interconnected, right? I mean, so my last, I just wanted to put it for Judy and for others who are doing some really exciting things. I wanted to put a plug-in for a tool that we're creating called Minnesota Thrives, because there's no one pathway for communities to promote well-being. We know that there's lots of great ideas and work that is happening, and we want to try to spread that across the community or across the state, and learn from each other. And so we are creating a tool, or we created a tool called Min Thrives. It's an interactive database. And you can complete a survey about the work that you're doing, a project or initiative, and share it. And it'll be included in the database. And so when somebody's like, we need more social connectedness for seniors, for programs under $10,000, you could see if there are other examples out there that somebody is already doing, and then you could reach out to them and find out more and how you might implement that in your community. So, thank you, Shelley, for putting it in there. Great. Okay, and then Emily is talking about her experience. She's from White Earth. Emily Gray, program director of Mentor Minnesota. Yay, we've had Mentor Minnesota present at the learning community. And she says, culture is vital. Culture is healing. Yes, you've mentioned the power of getting connected and volunteering. Data highlights the benefits of mental health through culturally grounded programming and building strong relationships with young people through mentorship. Absolutely. I encourage folks to reach out to their local mentorship program and connect or volunteer. Many have transitioned to virtual platform. That's awesome. Yes, and Rachel says, I'm a big fan of support groups, skills sessions outside, regardless of temperatures. We have to be that way in Minnesota. Amazing what nature and access to the sun and fresh air can do for the soul. Yes. Awesome. All right. Love the connections being made. Emily, please email Judy because she wants to talk to you. Well, I hope this was useful information, and always happy to talk and learn more from others. And so reach out to me or to any of the suicide prevention team. They're amazing resources as well. And so, yeah, I think there's lots more work to do and more things to learn. And this is really just, I think, in some ways, I think mental health promotion is it's maybe like a toddler in terms of development. There's a lot more to learn. Like, what's the most effective things? So thanks for everyone for participating.
Yeah, thank you, Anna, for presenting, and thank you everyone for joining us. Yeah, we will be uploading this onto YouTube, and then I'll be sending a follow-up email with the slides on here. So yeah, bye everyone. Hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thanks. Bye, Shelley. Thanks for organizing this.
Yeah, of course.